The U.S. Department of Defense is supposed to kill America's enemies, not her babies. Regardless of how you feel about pro-life issues, you've got to accept the fact that Americans, by a margin of 3 out of 4, are not willing to tolerate the expenditure of U.S. taxpayer funds for abortions. I'm glad that one man in this body is willing to stand up for the unborn, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to stand with him.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, we've had in place since 1984 a set of laws that have been amended in 1996 and then again in 2003 that today are codified at 10 U.S.C. Section 1093. Those laws make clear that we cannot use Department of Defense funds or Department of Defense facilities or property for abortions. You cannot do that. You cannot do that in the absence of rape, incest, or where the life of the mother is in jeopardy unless the abortion happens. This in turn reflects a very simple and very long-lasting truth among the American people, which is the American people come at the abortion issue from a wide variety of perspectives. There are some who believe that life begins at conception and that anything from that moment forward cannot be justified. There are others who believe that until the baby is actually born and takes its first breath, the baby has no legally cognizable protectable rights. There are some who would take that even further. I find it difficult to accept that some feel that way, but some really do. Even though Americans find themselves at very different positions along this ideological spectrum, specifically related to the issue of abortion, there's one point that unites Americans overwhelmingly, and I mean to the tune of 3 out of 4. Something in the range of about 75% of Americans agree on one thing when it comes to abortion. You should not, must not ever use federal taxpayer funds for abortion. Why? Well, pro-life Americans, I think, find this explanation obvious. They don't like abortion anyway, so they don't want government funding it. But it appears about half of the people who are not pro-life, who believe in some policies that recognize somebody ought to have the ability to get an abortion, about half of them, it turns out, believe that we still shouldn't use federal funds to do that because a lot of Americans are uncomfortable with that, and it's with good reason. So these policies have been around for a really long time, and with good reason. And even though overall preferences, strategies, beliefs, public opinions about abortion have changed from time to time, this one has remained overwhelmingly against the use of public funds. So it was surprising and alarming to my friend Senator Tuberville when about a year ago he started hearing rumors to the effect that the Pentagon would begin using federal funds to facilitate abortions. He went and did as any faithful member of the Senate Armed Services Committee would. He met with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. And he said, look, I don't know whether these rumors are true, but if they are true, I find them alarming. And if they turn out to be true, I'll have no choice as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee to make sure that there are consequences to you if you take this lawless act. And he had good reason to point this out. Look, the only reason for that policy, the only fathomable reason, is to circumvent the plain purpose, intent, effect of 10 U.S.C. 1093. That's the only reason it's there. And they've written it ever so craftily so as to be able to have a colorable argument. I think it's an argument that flies in the face of the stated purpose, intent, effect of this federal statute at 10 U.S.C. 1093. So that they could argue, well, we're not using it to perform the abortion, we're just using it to fly people to get the abortion, and then we're using it to pay for 3 weeks of paid leave time for anyone who wants to get the abortion, and we're going to pay their travel, their room and board, everything else. We'll pay for everything else around the abortion. But because we're not paying for the abortion itself, we're in the clear. Now, Senator Tuberville recognized something very important, that the sole purpose of this policy would be to circumvent federal law and to make it difficult to impossible to challenge it in a court of law. I'll get back to that in a moment. So he did something right then and there, something that, whether you agree with the tactic he used or not, you've got to find admirable. He was taking the bull by the horns. He utilized the resources at his disposal, as any Division I champion football coach would do. He did it, and he said, okay, if you do this, that's fine. I suppose that's, well, it's not fine, but it's your prerogative to do that. But if you do that, I'm going to exercise my prerogatives as a senator. And my prerogatives as a senator are such that I can require you to take the long way, the long road, the long and more difficult path instead of the shorter path that we nearly always use when we're confirming flag officer military personnel. That is, generals and admirals, as well as political appointees within the Department of Defense. Now, let's understand something about a hold. A hold is not an inexorable block. He's not damning these people to Senate confirmation. Hell, doesn't have that power. That's above his pay grade, all of ours. What he's doing is he's saying, there's the fast path and there's the slow path. We always use the fast path, but that requires the acquiescence, the agreement, the unanimous consent of all 100 of us. If you don't do that, I, Senator Tuberville, will make you take the slow path. Secretary Austin is a decorated war hero. Secretary Austin has been around for a long time. He knows the Senate, he knows the Pentagon well, he knew the risks. He chose to play chicken. He chose to look a United States Senator in the eye and say, thank you, I'll take that under advisement. And in a cowardly moment, he decided to arrogate to himself power that does not belong to him, because the Constitution of the United States doesn't give it to him, because you can't legislate from the E-ring of the Pentagon. No matter how strongly he feels, no matter how compelling his urge to facilitate the performance of abortion using federal funds, contrary to public opinion, contrary to federal law, he does not have that power. And shame on him. It is to his everlasting shame that he would arrogate to himself that power and then have the audacity to blame Senator Tuberville for the slowdown that he himself knowingly, willfully, shamefully created. Let's be clear here. There are exactly two ways, Mr. President, two ways that regardless of Senator Tuberville's holds, regardless of whether he ever budges an inch, we can take care of this. Approach one could happen tonight. I guess it's technically morning. It's, 12:56 or so a.m. So we'll say this morning, right now. President Biden, if you're watching TV, pay attention. I'm going to give you a real easy recipe to follow. You can do this even at 1 a.m. President Biden, if you're not awake, you really should be watching this because this is compelling television. If you're staffing President Biden tonight, you might go wake him up. I think he'll really enjoy this. I think he'll enjoy it a lot. It's much easier to do than riding a bike, and you're not going to fall over doing it. All you have to do is suspend your godless, lawless abortion travel policy. Just suspend it right now. If this is affecting military readiness, so be it. End it. End it tonight. You've got a duty to do that. Lloyd Austin, you can do it too. Suspend your abortion travel policy. Now look, I know you guys feel really passionately about abortion. I know that for whatever reason, you've lost your freaking minds ever since that fateful day in June of 2022, when the Supreme Court of the United States ended a nearly half-century-long judicial hegemony over the issue of abortion. It ended that because, well, it turns out the Constitution doesn't say anything about abortion. And by saying nothing about abortion, it leaves the issue of abortion to elected lawmakers, not to 9 lawyers dressed in robes. There's an empty chair here. Two of them, in fact. Two empty chairs occupied by two executive branch individuals, Secretary Lloyd Austin and President Joe Biden, who could end this tonight, but they refused to do so. So, that's avenue number one through which we could end this. Avenue number two, we could do as Senator Tuberville told Secretary Austin we would do from the very outset. That is, we could confront them the slow way. We went 40 consecutive days and nights, kind of biblical, really, if you think about it, without a single vote in August. We're about to go 10 or 11 more consecutive days and nights without a single vote. We've gone days, even when we're in session, where we'll cast maybe one or two votes at the most, or sometimes none. There are ways in which you can tee these people up. You know the rules, Senator Schumer. You know how to call these people up. You know how to tee these up for a vote. And yet we're down here tonight, all of us Republicans. When we talk about military readiness, why on earth are we not aiming our remarks at President Biden or at Secretary Austin? Why on earth are we not directing them at Senator Schumer? They all have the ability to end this. With Schumer, it would take longer. It would require more of an investment of time on our part, sure. But why are we not directing our arrows at them? Why are they going to Tuberville instead? I don't get it. As to the suggestion made by one of my colleagues, my friend, distinguished colleague, a senior senator from South Carolina, that this ought to be resolved in court. The courts of law are where we argue legal disputes, that nearly all legal disputes should be resolved there. It's just wrong. It's just dead wrong. The fact is, Mr. President, as any lawyer, any member of the bar, any officer of the court knows, most legal disputes never make it to court. Among other things, you have to establish what's called Article III standing. You've got to show an injury, in fact, fairly traceable to the conduct of the defendant that's capable of being redressed by a court of competent jurisdiction. Many cases, many disputes arise in a context in which it would be difficult, if not impossible, to find someone with Article III standing who's even allowed to challenge these things in federal court. I respectfully submit that it's like a needle in a haystack on a distant planet. It's just like a really, really difficult case in which to even imagine, even fathom someone with Article III standing who could do it. Senator Graham referred to some legal experts, legal scholars who I respect and admire who have been looking into this, and I've looked at their written work product, and it's excellent. But even they acknowledged it's not at all clear you could even find anyone with standing. Now, this is exactly the kind of case that needs to be argued, that needs to be settled, not in the courts of law, because it can't. But it must be resolved here in the branch of government that is charged with making the law, and that it's also charged with overseeing the branches of government that execute, implement, and enforce the law, the executive branch. That's our job. This is where it has to be done. So look, if you want to give the farm away, if you want to say this, we're just going to leave it alone, that's fine. But let's not kid ourselves. No court's coming to the rescue. It's not going to work. You're not going to find anyone with standing, I can almost guarantee you. And even if you can find somebody with standing, they have crafted this thing so deliberately, so maliciously, so carefully, as to make it nearly impossible for anyone who even could establish standing, which they can't, to succeed on the merits. Because at the end of the day, they'll look at them and they'll say, well, gosh, shucks, we didn't do that. We didn't perform any abortions. All we did is we just, drove the people to the state or flew the people to the state where they're going to get the abortion. Then we paid for their, hotel, their room, board, lodging, gave them 3 weeks of per diem in order to do it. No, we didn't do any of that. So by a rigid textual analysis, which probably would be the one that would prevail in a court of law, you'd lose. Even if you could find somebody with Article III standing, which you can't. You're not going to find that. What remedy is there? If we're going to allow the laws that our branch of government has made, if we're going to allow that law, or the law in general, to be an ass, then fine, let it go. But let's not kid ourselves. This isn't getting fixed in a court of law. We've got the remedy here, and whether you agree with Senator Tuberville's initial decision to do it this way or not, don't spit on me and tell me it's raining. Don't walk in here and tell me that there's another solution. Don't walk in here and tell me that courts of law are where all legal disputes have to be resolved, when you know darn well a lot of them can't, and this one sure as heck won't be. It saddens me deeply that this many brave men and women have been delayed. It troubles me deeply to consider the many families whose lives have been disrupted by this. But I respectfully submit, with all the passion I'm capable of communicating at 1:10 in the morning, at a bare minimum, you're wrong to just blame him. I don't think you should be blaming him at all. Secretary Austin and President Biden, you set in motion a sequence of events that you knew darn well would culminate in this very thing. You knew darn well that you'd use this as an opportunity for demagoguery. That's not cool. You can't make a law, you can't change a law. Not from the E-ring of the Pentagon, not from the Oval Office, not from any quarter of any part of this town or this great land or this entire world outside of this chamber and the chamber just down the hall from us. That's why it matters. So yeah, this is about life. Yeah, this is also about the military. But we swore an oath to that Constitution. We swore an oath that we'll make the law, we'll not delegate that law to somebody else. We're not going to let somebody else make the law, especially a law that is destructive of life, liberty, and property, as that is ultimately the sole purpose of government, to protect life, liberty, and property. Quite ironically, the bigger, the more out of control, the more unrestrained, the more unaccountable any government becomes, it is inevitably the consequence of that government that it becomes destructive of life, liberty, and property. That's how we got to where we are here, where a branch of government not entitled to make the law has made law, and has made law to facilitate the taking of unborn human life. My colleagues who are here tonight, whom I love and respect, are blaming the wrong culprit. It is not Tommy Tuberville. It is Joe Biden, Lloyd Austin, and Chuck Schumer. Let's keep that blame where it belongs. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking that this can be remedied in court. It can't, it won't. We all know that. If we're going to stand up for the unborn who cannot speak for themselves, we're going to have to do it. If we're going to prevent somebody else from making law when it's not their prerogative, it has to be us. We've been asked the question over and over again, why punish the innocent? Indeed, why punish the innocent? You know who's innocent? Babies. You know who doesn't have a voice in the Senate? Babies. You know who can't speak for themselves? Babies. You know, a baby doesn't have a name. A baby doesn't have a military rank. A baby doesn't have a professional career upon which to rely, upon which he or she can have people rallying around the baby in defense of that baby's life. It's one of the many reasons why Congress saw fit to adopt 10 U.S.C. Section 1093 to make sure that the federal government didn't contribute to this. The U.S. Department of Defense is supposed to kill America's enemies, not her babies. Regardless of how you feel about pro-life issues, you've got to accept the fact that Americans, by a margin of 3 out of 4, are not willing to tolerate the expenditure of U.S. taxpayer funds for abortions. My colleagues posited over and over again tonight, in a way that I found frankly very offensive, that we're somehow afraid to have the credentials of these military men and women read from the Senate floor. If they think that they read us wrong, 180 degrees wrong, we're not afraid of that, not for an instant. Our quarrel is not with them. Our quarrel is with those who would circumvent the law in order to kill children. Any society that sacrifices babies for the convenience of adults is in for a rough ride. I resent also the fact that some on the Senate floor tonight have implicitly challenged our patriotism, our gratitude for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, our Marines, even our national security, because we stand behind one man's effort to protect the unborn who can't speak for themselves, who can't fight for themselves, who don't have a name or a military rank to secure their position in life. We've been told over and over again that these 1, 2, 3, and 4-star generals and admirals are being punished for something they had nothing to do with. Here again, the same can be said of babies whose lives will be snuffed out with the assistance of U.S. taxpayer dollars. We're told over and over again about how pro-life these speakers are. And I don't doubt that they are. But one minute they're uttering those words, the very next minute they're accusing Senator Tuberville of jeopardizing our national security or not caring about the families of these individuals. I'm sorry, that's not fair. Nor is it helpful for them to dismissively, passive-aggressively suggest, well, we've just got to deal with this. We just got to find a solution. Well, then find one. Look, I get it. They don't love the tactic he's chosen. It's not the one I chose, not the one they chose, but it's what he's chosen. If they're going to passively, aggressively tell him that he's got to find another solution to protect the unborn, then they had darn well better direct him to one. But they haven't. The closest they've come is to suggest litigation. Litigation is of no avail because there's not any plausible existing human who has Article III standing to challenge this. And moreover, even if we could find one, which we can't, this is the kind of insult to the law, the kind of violation of the law, the kind of effort to circumvent the law. It's not likely to prevail in the court. In fact, it's almost certainly doomed to it. So no, litigation doesn't solve the problem. It is, moreover, just punting to the judicial branch of government something that is a distinctively legislative task. It doesn't do it for me. The fact that they say over and over again, and I quote, "There has got to be a better way. If there is one, then help him find it. But don't just tell him he's wrong for standing up for this without giving him a plausible path in a different direction." Let me outline just a couple of different paths that I think we could pursue. And I'd like their help in getting there. I'd like to know whether they'd be willing to join with us. Why not have Republican senators say, we're not going to pass a National Defense Authorization Act unless we fix this issue? Why not have them sign up and say, we as Republicans either aren't going to do that, or we're not going to give another dime to non-military aid to Ukraine or to Gaza, or who else knows, whatever else, unless they fix this problem in statute, or unless the Pentagon and the White House withdraws its abortion travel funding policy. Those are just a couple of ideas. Those are actually productive ideas. And I'd love to know whether they'd be willing to join the fight in that, whether they'd be willing to help us get 41 signatures on a letter committing to do one of those things. Did they offer that tonight? No. They just continued to pay lip service to the notion that this is Joe Biden's fault and Lloyd Austin's fault and Chuck Schumer's fault. But all the time, they're pointing the finger to Tommy Tuberville. That's not fair. We owe him better than that. We who campaign on the banner of pro-life owe Tommy Tuberville more than that. We owe the unborn of this country more than that. We can do better, but to do better, we've got to actually act. I'm glad that one man in this body is willing to stand up for the unborn, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to stand with him. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.